is my joy and delight to introduce our speaker for this session. This is Darryl Howery. His introduction goes like this. The Alberta economy has undergone significant changes in the past 2 years, creating upheavals in the labor market. Who knew? While some sectors have improved and unemployment rates have come down, there is still significant uncertainty in the future of job growth and where the new jobs will be coming from. This presentation highlights insights into where future growth in Alberta employment can be expected and where job growth can be expected to be stagnant. So all of us that are looking for jobs really need to be here. All right, so what are some of the outcomes that we can hope for? First of all, the question, where are Alberta's new jobs and employment going to come from? Great question. Where can our employers find the skilled workers to fill the critical jobs? And what occupations are expected to continue to be in short supply in Alberta's labor market? Darryl Howery is an economist specializing in forecasting and labor market information. He has prepared detailed employment demand and supply forecasts at the provincial and regional levels in both Alberta and BC, as well as various industry forecasts. This includes detailed employment forecasts for the Calgary region, produced twice yearly, as well as regular economic updates for Western Canadian provinces. Ladies and gentlemen, Darryl Howery, who's going to show us where the jobs are.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for asking me to come today. I've had the distinct pleasure of addressing this conference a few times, and it's always interesting to have interesting discussion and interesting questions. I would just offer to you as we're going through things, certainly have time at the end to answer questions if you've got any. But if you're listening and not understanding, or if you've got a burning question that you'd like to get an answer to, feel free to interrupt me and let me know, and we'll take it from there. Yeah, we've been through some interesting times economically and in the labor market. There's and I guess the recent election, the economy and the job market in particular has been a primary focus of a lot of attention around the political race. Some of the information that ends up coming out of that discourse isn't always that helpful. And some of the things that you may see today, you'll say, oh, I'm a little surprised to see that, because that's not what I have been hearing. But the data doesn't tell you any falsehoods. It just is what it is. I'm going to go through a lot of data today and share with you, I guess, some insights that I think I have about what the data means for the Alberta economy. One of the things that I guess you probably would be interested in knowing is that we have done a lot of labor market information work. And one of the things over the course of years you see the economy going through cycles, and every cycle is different. There are certainly unique circumstances that have gotten us to this point today, and probably are going to be some unique circumstances that may help to pull us out of that. The way to kind of look at the forecasting business is that you can't really know where you're going until you know where you are at. So this is, this is about the future. It's also kind of understanding how we've got to where we are today. I do have an agenda, and what I want to talk about is the background of the future, aka the past. So we'll review a little bit about how we've gotten here, some of the key economic issues that are going to affect future employment, some industry growth, so what industries have been performing well and some that maybe haven't been performing so well, and of course I think maybe mostly of interest, like what are the occupations that are going to be in demand, and maybe occupations that employers are going to have some difficulty in filling. Alberta employment, this is a graph that shows you total employment in the province and how it's performed since 2001, so the last 15 to 20 years roughly. And you can see there's been some ups and downs. The first period of downturn was after the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. Absolutely. Yeah. You can take notes though if you want, but it's hard to write it all down. 2008-2009 was a financial crisis when the banks got bailed out and the mortgage industry collapsed, and oil prices went down, and there was a lot of economic mayhem and turmoil, not only in Alberta, across Canada and internationally. So our employment dropped significantly, and then most recently in 2015 we had another economic downturn, but this was primarily caused by a significant drop in oil prices. But you can see since then we have made some progress in recovering. We're almost back to where we were in 2015. In that 2008 downturn, the provincial economy lost about 100,000 jobs, 100,000 jobs on a net basis. More people lost their job, but some other people picked up some work. But on a net basis, we lost 100,000 jobs. And just in the magnitude of that, that would be like the city of Saskatoon all of a sudden, within the course of less than a year, becoming unemployed. That's a huge impact. Similarly, we've had a downturn more recently, but this has been somewhat smaller in a net basis, aggregate basis, 50,000 jobs. But as you'll see, some sectors of the economy have been hit by at least this much in of themselves. As I mentioned, kind of what's happened since the downturn, we're kind of back to where we were in terms of total employment, but how many here feel we're actually back there? Anybody? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. Unlikely. I don't think I know of people that feel like the economy is back to where it was before the most recent downturn. Yet, in total employment actually is above that particular point. So why do we feel that way? Well, we'll see some of that. Employment insurance recipients. This is EI. So if you've been gainfully employed and you're now gainfully unemployed, you're able to access employment insurance. Back in 2008, when the downturn happened, we saw a significant spike in employment insurance recipients. It went up by 50,000 in a very short period of time because the economic impact of that was severe and it was quick. Then those people, your EI benefits ran out after a certain period of time, so this isn't necessarily an indicator of the economy, but you match this graph up with the previous one. The economy picked up a lot, EI recipients went down, and then along came 2015, and look what happened to EI. Recipients was actually bigger, even though the unemployment employment didn't go down as much, but EI recipients went up by a significant amount, greater than what happened in 2008. And one of the things about why I think it doesn't feel so good is that if you look at that baseline EI rate back in 2008, you know, the EI baseline when the economy was booming was in this line. And in 2015, when things recovered, we didn't quite get back to that 2008 baseline. And now that things have recovered to some degree at least, we're not back to even the 2015 baseline in terms of EI recipients. And so what that tells me that there's still a lot of churn and turmoil in the economy. While the total aggregate number of jobs has picked up, there isn't the stability in the economy that there was, because we're still seeing a number of people being forced to leave their work and take up EI. The unemployment rate, we see the same story. So again, this kind of shows us why we are not feeling the benefit of that employment gain. Back before 2008, we were basically operating at full employment. You know, economists would point to an unemployment rate of somewhere between 3 and 5%. So even though unemployment isn't zero, basically the economy is at full employment. There's always going to be a certain amount of static unemployment within the economy due to inefficiencies in the labor market. So when you get down to 3% or 3-something%, you're basically operating at full employment. When we haven't gotten back there, we didn't get back there after the recovery in 2010, and we're certainly not back there yet. Well, everybody talks about and blames oil prices. The oil prices are a significant factor in the provincial economy and the national economy, as we've all learned. And we've seen a lot of turmoil in oil prices, and this isn't unusual. Oil prices are notoriously unstable and impossible to predict. So when you see a projection of oil prices, you go, yeah, okay. Because nobody knows. Nobody knows. There's so many factors that affect the price of oil. And we've seen a lot of volatility in oil prices. It's affected by, general economic conditions, geopolitical conditions, availability of supply, a whole bunch of factors. But one of the things that we've learned about most recently with respect to this recent downturn is not just the price of oil prices that we hear about most of the time, talking about WTI, West Texas Intermediate, or other world oil prices. We hear now about the price of oil that Alberta producers receive for their oil. And that has been significant. It's always been lower than the WTI price, because WTI, there's different qualities and grades of oil. WTI is the price of what might be referred to as really high quality grade crude oil. The refining requirements of that oil are relatively low compared to a lot of the Alberta oil, especially oil that comes out of the oil sands before it's upgraded. And so buyers will pay a premium for oil that requires less upgrading than oil that requires a lot of upgrading and refining. And so Alberta tends to have a price gap between what's received here and what oil producers that produce higher quality, higher grades of oil. That gap, as you can see on the bottom part of the chart, is the kind of the pink or purple line. I don't know what it looks like to you guys. It's pink on my computer. But that gap has typically been in the range of about $10 to $15 a barrel. And recently, and over certain periods of time, it's approached $40 to $45 a barrel. So at some points, at this really low point in the where the orange line touches, some Alberta producers were only receiving about $10 a barrel for oil, whereas back in the boom times, you can see the price of oil was up to near $100 a barrel. That's a huge impact for those producers, and they have to react to that. But this is one of the things that obviously affects the provincial economy. One of the other things about the energy sector that may not be obvious and doesn't get a lot of discussion is how the energy sector consumes resources, and in particular of interest here are labor resources. Well, one of the things that the energy sector does is it explores, and then when it finds reserves, it goes out and undertakes drilling and activities to draw the oil out of the ground. And this activity ends up being one of the large labor consumers and in the production process of producing oil. But we've seen a shift. We've seen a shift in oil production in Alberta from conventional oil, where we have exploration and drilling and then recovery, to what's called tertiary recovery techniques. Fracking is one example of that, which is a lot less labor intensive in terms of the finding and extraction of the oil resource, and we're also shifting towards oil sands, which is a totally different kind of extraction and refining process. So one of the indicators of kind of how the provincial economy and employment in the energy sector is changing is looking at drilling activity, and you can see that the amount of drilling activity, which is a high producer of employment, peaked around 2007, 2008 before the financial downturn, and then it dropped precipitously. And since then, it's been continuing to drop. This is one of the indicators which tells forecasters like myself and people who follow the energy sector that the nature of the energy sector is changing. It's changing because of the types of reserves that we have available in the province. It's also changing because of technology. And so the number of workers that used to be employed in the energy sector is probably, even if oil were to go back up to 80, 90, or even perhaps $100 a barrel, and Alberta producers were going to capture a vast majority of that, the price differential wasn't so great, you're not going to see those levels of employment that traditionally were in the energy sector and the oil patch coming back. So areas that relied significantly on those types of activities are not going to see that coming back again. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen if energy continues to improve? You'll see growth in employment, but you're not going to see that growth of employment coming back. And one of the things that you don't see in these numbers, but I'll share with you, when you look at labor productivity, the amount of output per worker in different industry sectors, traditionally in the energy sector, output per worker approaches $900,000 to $1 million a year on average. So when you reduce the number of workers in that energy sector, you have to replace that job and to produce the same amount of economic activity in another sector, which is other sectors like professional sectors like healthcare, professional scientific services, where you're employing engineers, legal profession. The output per worker in those sectors on average sometimes exceeds $100,000 a year. So think about the energy sector, the oil and gas sector, where output per worker might be $900,000 per worker per year. You've got to replace those jobs because they're probably not coming back to the same degree as we saw them previously. You've got to replace them with jobs that are producing output of $100,000, maybe $120,000 or $130,000 per year. Well, it takes at least 7 or 8 of those jobs to make up for one lost energy job. So the economy is got to generate a lot of jobs, a lot of high-paying jobs, and a lot of output to get all of that economic activity back. Excuse me, and that's one of the reasons why it's not feeling the same. Even though employment has risen, it's not feeling like we have the same amount of economic activity that we had previously. What else? Alberta oil production. Wow, you know, we've heard a lot in the political discourse about Alberta oil being shut in, and this is a problem, and while it is a problem, if you look at Alberta oil production, our production has continued to grow. I mean, it's up and down. There's various reasons for that. But the trajectory of oil output in the province has been pretty much a stock that if you could buy this on the stock exchange, this has pretty much been a sure thing. If you look at other factors like export data, again, exports, a lot of noise in the data, it goes up and down, but generally it's also been on an upward trajectory. So the malaise in the energy sector in the province, while it's significant, and a lot of workers have lost their job in the oil patch in the last couple of years, Alberta oil production has gone up, our exports have gone up. It's another indicator that things have changed. One of the implications of the economy and the downturn in the economy is what is the impact on wages. And you can see until the downturn in 2015, average weekly earnings in the province, again, this is a stock you'd want to buy. It was just generally going up. There's noise in it, but the trajectory is generally positive. And Alberta has had, since I've been doing this since about the mid to early 2000s, late 90s, 2000s, Alberta average weekly earnings have been significantly above the Canadian average and above the average for most provinces in Canada for most of the time. But you can see what's happened is we've taken a hit here. Again, this is why it doesn't feel so good, and it's also, this is tied to the output per worker, those energy sector jobs that have been lost, high income jobs, high output per worker jobs, the income has gone down. That affects lots of other aspects of the economy, like retail trade and other things. And you can see, again, it's been kind of up and down, and we have come back again. But I don't think that the retail sector would probably tell you that things are as good as they were 2 or 3 years ago. So I've been talking now for about 20 minutes or so, and not quite a half an hour, and I've given you lots of stuff. How is it? How are we doing? It doesn't feel any better, does it? So I'll tell you an interesting story. It's an economic story. A guy I used to work with. I used to work at Stantec, and way back when it was still Stanley Associates Engineering, if anybody remembers all of that. And I worked with some planners, and the planners, when my kids would come into the office, the planners, the guys in the planning would just be across the way. And planners, like, they have maps and they do coloring, and my kids would maybe 5 come in and say, well, look at that guy, he gets to color for work, that's a cool job. And I said, yeah, actually, it is a pretty cool job. And there was a kind of a little store operation down below in the building, and it was kind of for charity. It was sold baked goods and things like that, and so they would have cookies and different kinds of stuff and sodas and milks and things like that. Anyway, one of my colleagues there would go down, and like the cookies were $1. He would, just for donation purpose, he would just give the lady $1, and he'd never take a cookie. So this happened for quite a while. Anyway, one day the lady, he was handing her his $1, and she grabbed him by the arm and said, "Excuse me," and the guy said, "Okay, I know. You want to know, like, why do I give you the $1 and never take a cookie?" And she says, "No, I just wanted to tell you that the price of cookies has gone up to $1.25." Economics, lots of fun. So we only have about 3 more hours to go, so we'll press on here. There's been some challenges. Again, there's been a lot of discussion about things, but I'm not so sure the discussion is really kind of focused on some of the real challenges that are affecting the labor market. And this is not news to you guys. You guys work in this business all the time, but technological change has been affecting the nature of work and the type of work and skill requirements of work. And the expectation is that this is probably not going to slow down. If anything, technological change is going to accelerate. And it's going to accelerate at an increasing rate, so that the kinds of work that people do is going to be changing. The kinds of skills that people need to do their jobs is going to be changing. And we see this every day. I go to McDonald's once in a while, and I can go in and I can do just about everything except make the burger now, because I touch technology. I touch my card, everything's done, and then I go pick up my order. And you think that, well, that technology has replaced jobs, and it has, because now they don't need as many people taking orders. But I saw an interesting report that looked at what McDonald's was reporting about how implementing this ordering technology has affected their business. Their business has gone up. They're selling more food out of their restaurants now than they were previously, and the actual employment at those restaurants hasn't changed, but the nature of work has changed. They don't have so many people taking orders and collecting money. They have more people working in the back making the food, and also they provided some services which they don't do, so those people, instead of taking customers' orders, are now taking the orders out to people sitting in the restaurant or out to their car. So while that technology has changed the nature of how they do business, the actual employment implications of that in terms of the total number of people employed hasn't changed, but the nature of work has changed. We did we had the benefit of doing some work with the I don't know what they call themselves now. Alberta, it used to be Alberta Human Resources, Alberta Labor, Career Development stuff. We have done employer surveys in Calgary for 6 years, and we ask kind of a base set of questions about what employers are doing, what their needs and shortages are. And every year we've asked some interesting special questions, we call them. And that was last year we asked a question on technology. And it was a really challenging piece of research because we had to frame the question in a way that employers could answer it. And the way that we decided to do that is we wanted to know in particular about how technology was impacting their workforce. And so to say yes, they had to answer a few questions about how technology was affecting the nature of work and the workers and the number of workers that they had. And we found that the implications of technology varied a lot by industry. And so some industries were adopting different kinds of technologies at different rates, and some industries were having to hire new people to implement the technology and use the technology, and some people were finding they didn't need as many workers because technology was replacing workers. And so I won't go into that, but I would just refer you to the Calgary Labor website. That special report is there, and it's really interesting to see sector by sector how technology is affecting the workforce for different employers. And we actually documented what the technological change was that was being adopted and how it was affecting workers. I have to say about half of it I didn't really know what the technology was because I don't work in that industry, but if you do or know about that industry, these things will be meaningful to you. We found, bottom line at the end of the day, when we added it all up, we looked at a window of history, and then we looked at a window going forward of a year or two, and we found on a net basis in the Calgary region across all employers that we surveyed, and it was 800 employers across all the different industry groups and different firm sizes, that on a net basis there was no material change in the number of workers that those businesses, those employers required. But there were significant changes in what those workers were doing and what their skill requirements were. So just as something to, if you're interested in this topic, go look up that report because it gives you a very tangible Alberta experience about how technological change is affecting different businesses and different industries. And this is going to happen more and more and more. I think one of the things that I don't really like about what I read about AI, the impact of artificial intelligence and other technological advances, is about how it's going to decimate, like whole sectors and whole occupation groups are going to be decimated by the adoption of AI. And this isn't the first time that we've heard this. If you go back, and I'm becoming the older and older I get, the more a fan I become of history. And back in Industrial Revolution, factories of workers were making cloth and clothes, and along came the spinning wheels that could make thread and cloth much more quickly. And there were people opposing the implementation of this technology because all those jobs were going to go. Well, a lot of those jobs weren't that great. There's a lot of child labor and 12, 14 hours a day, and they didn't make very much. But in fact, that change did affect the workers in that industry, but that adoption of that technology actually improved different types of other kinds of activities, and more jobs were created of it. So I would just if you read lots of articles about how the advancement of technology and the adoption of technology is going to decimate wide swaths of employment, I would kind of raise a skeptical eye to that, because what those articles don't talk about is how the economy is going to change and how the nature of business is going to change and how different types of job opportunities and employment is going to be created. So that's a big one, technological change. Economic diversification, well, this was a lot talked about, economic diversification. And I started my professional career back in the 80s, and my second job was with Alberta Economic Development. And in the 80s, we were talking, and one of the core things that we were working on was diversifying the economy. And boy, did we do a good job of that. I work with a fellow that I met there, and he helps me and he works with me on projects from time to time. And it wasn't that long ago, we were kind of reminiscing about the old days, and he said, so do you think that if economic development, the departments, he worked in strategic planning, I worked in transportation services branch, if these things didn't exist, would the economy look any different today than it would have if we hadn't been doing that work? And I think the answer is, I don't think so. I don't think that what we did there really had much of an impact. And the reason is that economic diversification doesn't, it may be, facilitated by government policy, but it doesn't happen because of government policy. It happens because we have some natural advantage. The regional, provincial, national economy has some natural advantage in producing a good or a service that gives us a competitive edge in doing it. And so when you look at economic diversification, you want to try and pick which industries and which sectors are going to be growing. What are the sectors that we have some key strategic advantage in? And one that's talked a lot about, and I think this is very legitimate because the data shows it, is in food processing. Our natural advantage in food processing is we have a history of growing things, growing food and supplying food locally, nationally, and internationally. And we're getting much better and more sophisticated about producing different types of food products. And for the local marketplace, which is there's been an increase in demand for locally grown food products of various types. And we're also getting better and more sophisticated at distributing and selling those food products elsewhere in Canada and abroad. And it doesn't happen because we started a program. It happens because we happen to have a natural advantage in producing food. We've got a lot of good land, we've got a lot of history and experience in producing food, and we're getting better at being able to package and market those products farther and farther afield. That's the key to economic diversification. So there's some sectors where we're seeing some of that happening, and I'll talk to what some of those are that we see. The other thing, key kind of broad issue affecting the workforce is flexibility. Flexibility, because we're in it's kind of obvious, I guess. It wasn't obvious to me at all times, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. Workforce flexibility in almost everything is so important. Having workers that have some ability to transfer their skills and knowledge from one problem to another problem, or to apply or be interested in growth and being able to apply their expertise and learn new things so that they can be continue to be productive and resourceful. And why do we need this? It used to be the case that you went to school or you went to university, you planned out your career, you got a job, and if things went okay, you'd probably retire in that job. That just is not going to happen. People are going to have multiple careers, and you've got to be able to adapt and be flexible. Even if you're working for the same employer, the nature of work is going to change for the various reasons we talked about, because of the diversification of the economy, because technological change is affecting, and we're now competing not just on a local market or even a national market, we're competing in international markets, and those markets are incredibly dynamic. So flexibility in the workforce and being able to adapt to the needs of employers as time goes on is becoming increasingly important. So, economics. So we want to look at some sectors. This is the mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction sector, which is just one piece of the energy sector. The energy sector, the industry classification groups that I'm going to show you some slides on now, somebody made these up, and they don't always kind of conform to how we think about the economy and our experience. So the energy sector is at the two-digit NAICS level. If you're familiar with the industry classification system, it's in about 4 different NAICS groups, varying degrees. This extraction sector, you can see, really follows the up and down patterns of the economy we looked at earlier. And look at, this is one sector alone in 2015 lost 40,000 jobs. They haven't come back so fast. And if we map oil prices The red line here are oil prices. If we map oil prices against employment in this sector, it follows very, very closely. So this is a sector, you know, if you're trying to guess and predict the market, if you think oil prices are going up, this would be a sector maybe to be a job in, but I would say bets are off on that. Different sectors of the economy look quite different. This is utilities. Utilities like water, power, telecommunications are included here. We see a downturn, but we haven't seen the same kind of robustness in terms of the changes. It's more stable, but it is certainly influenced by general economic conditions, because as the economy goes in a downturn, the basic services we need end up being in decline as well. But it is affected by the economy. The construction sector. The importance of the construction sector to the provincial economy can't be understated. If you are going through a period of strong economic growth, I can guarantee you the construction sector is driving a lot of that growth, because businesses are expanding, people are moving here, and houses are being built. And when the economy goes down, it just flips the other way around. So the construction sector kind of reinforces the positive economic growth patterns, and when the economy goes down, the construction sector is hurting even more so. And so then the construction sector is also changing. Technology is being introduced. Again, the nature of construction activity has been changing, but it's still very labor intensive, so there's a big labor impact on the construction sector depending on general economic conditions. This sector, in the latest downturn, lost 50,000 jobs. Manufacturing. This is a sector that if you talk to local economic development people, traveling anywhere in Alberta or across Canada, say, what kind of growth do you want to see? Well, we want really nice, clean manufacturing jobs, because they're high paying, and they help to bring professionals to the community. And so this is a sector that you kind of look to and you say, I would really, if the provincial economy was growing and was strong, we would see a lot of growth in the manufacturing sector. But in fact, we haven't really seen much growth in the manufacturing sector, even in high periods of boom times. And in fact, we've actually lost jobs in the manufacturing sector over the long term. 20,000 jobs. Now, I'm going to show you some other slides. I just want you to know manufacturing is a very diverse sector. You break it down from going from 2-digit industry classifications to 3-digit industry classifications. That one 2-digit classification, manufacturing, which is what this is, has over 50 kind of subcategories, soup to nuts. We'll look at some of them. Like this one, fabricated metal product manufacturing. So this is a sector that primarily services the energy sector. And you can see it follows that pattern with oil prices. 5,000 jobs. A lot of these jobs are not so far south to us in Nisku. And again, you see the relationship to oil prices. Bakeries and tortilla manufacturing. Well, I talked about food processing, and I don't know how big our tortilla manufacturing sector is in the province. It's probably a small part of this. This just happens to be the category. But baked goods. Look what happened to baked goods. We've seen a significant resurgence of fresh baked goods. And part of this is a change in desire of local consumers to locally produced food products, baked goods being included in that, as well as the ability to export certain types of baked products. We had some peak of baking activity going on back in 2001, and we're still not quite back to that, but this is a sector, this is one of the food processing sectors in the manufacturing group that holds some promise for future growth. Meat product manufacturing. The meat industry has had a topsy-turvy existence, I guess, in the last 20 years with various issues, not the least of which are consumer preference changes. But here's another sector where we're having some traction and some success in gaining a foothold back into some export markets for meat products. Again, this is a sector where We have a natural advantage in production, and we're getting our footing back in terms of being an exporter of meat products. Other food manufacturing, so there's a lot of food manufacturing categories, and this other category kind of captures everything that's left over. But you can see generally this has been a sector which has been increasing. It has some volatility, but generally has been on the increase, and we're expecting that it would continue to increase. Cannabis product manufacturing. Well, we all know this is going to be a huge growth industry. Well, I shouldn't say that. What should I say? We are already producing cannabis, but it's kind of under the radar. So what's happening is cannabis production is now going from the underground economy to the above ground economy. But one of the things that does, it creates some structure around the economy. So I don't know how many times I've read about the cannabis and hemp production industry is going to be creating 2,000 jobs here, 3,000 jobs here, and that's true. There will be an increase in employment and above ground or above ground economic activity with this sector, but it's going to be replacing some jobs that did exist, but we just weren't counting them because it wasn't legal activity. So this will be one to watch. Retail trade. This is generally legal activity. We've seen just generally an increase in employment in retail trade, and I have been, expecting, here's, true confessions. I've been expecting at some point to see, when I see new growth and development, not to see another mall. I just think, at some point we have enough malls, but apparently we don't. We just keep building more malls, and in spite of all of the online shopping that's going on, we're still seeing people having a desire to go out and shop. It's an activity of recreation, as I've learned from my kids, that we just go shopping because it's what we do. It's a fun activity to do. So, and the nature of retail has been changing. Retail facing the competition with online activity, and we're building a huge Amazon, what do they call it, a fulfillment center. Yes, fulfillment center of a few hundred jobs so that you can get your Amazon product, Amazon Prime next day or maybe even that afternoon if you're lucky. And Calgary's getting a bigger one, and Ottawa's got one, Vancouver's got 3 of them. But yet we're still seeing new retail development because retail is competing with the package being dropped off of your house by trying to provide a different service. So while I think the closure of malls in the States and certain places, repurposing of malls, shopping is still going to continue to be a growth sector. We've seen, in the course of this 15 years or so, 75,000 new jobs in retail. Healthcare and social assistance. Wow, this is one that will continue to grow. You look at the data, you can see this is monthly data for 16, 17 years. It just has gone up and up and up and up, and it will continue to go up. It goes up for 2 reasons. One, we're generally getting older, and as we get older, we require more healthcare and healthcare-related services. It also is an industry which has undergone a lot of technological change, and the level and the type of healthcare services that we're receiving is now significantly better than it was even 20 years or 30 years ago. Like 30 years ago, I don't think I could name anybody that I'd ever heard that had a hip replacement. And now I think, well, I'm older now too, but like Bob's got a hip replacement. There's 2 hip replacements over here. Everybody's got a hip replacement or a joint replacement. Just an example of how healthcare technology has improved, and our consumption of those technologies and those services has significantly improved. This is an area that's going to continue to grow. Food, services, and drinking places. Well, with the economic downturn, I would have expected that the drinking places part of it probably would have increased a little more than it has, but the income effect has probably overpowered that to some degree. This is one that kind of rolls with the economy. Accommodation services. Here's one that it's a difficult and complex sector. You think it wouldn't be. People, hotel rooms, motel rooms, people finding different types of accommodations. But this is one where technology has impacted the sector. You know, we've got Airbnb and other kinds of online app services. People's homes are now hotel rooms. And so that cuts into this particular sector. We've also, because of the energy downturn, a lot of you wonder why, geez, I went through this town, I can't remember the name of it now, and it had a brand new, like 3 brand new hotels. Like, why? Who's coming here? Who's using all these hotel rooms? And what it is it's energy sector construction and servicing crews. The hotels are there providing accommodation for short-term construction as well as long-term operations. Well, that's the nature of that business is changing. So this sector, in terms of its growth, is a little bit dubious, but we still have tourism as a part of that as well, which is why it's complicated. Here's a subsector of the healthcare sector, nursing and residential care facilities. Again, almost interrupted growth. It's going to continue to grow. Legal services. Look at, we're becoming more litigious, and we're seeing a growth in the number of legal associated jobs. Daycare and childcare services. So there's some social issues, I guess, and demand created for childcare services, and the initiatives by not only Alberta but other provinces to make childcare affordable so that parents with young children have access to childcare services and can participate in the workforce. That changes the workforce dynamic, but it also over here creates a demand for child and daycare service providers. And the nature of that's been changing because people's expectations about quality has gone up, so more training and requirements are being implemented. And we saw in the last 10 years or so about 4,000 jobs there. Florists. Here's an interesting example of a sector that's really gone downhill, but yet I see flowers everywhere. And so what's happened is there's just this kind of a structural change in how this sector is kind of categorized, because everywhere I go now I can buy flowers. I have no excuse to go and get flowers. And I hear that occasionally because they're everywhere. They're everywhere. At Safeway, at Walmart, wherever you go, you can buy flowers. But florists, as an individual operation, this has been in decline. Finance and insurance, it's generally a growth industry. Dentistry, another healthcare-related service. The nature of dentistry has certainly been affected by technology. I don't even really mind getting my teeth cleaned anymore. But the demand for that service will continue to grow with the population growth. And even public administration jobs, in spite of all of the talk we hear about, well, we've got to live within our means and things like that, yet the demand for public services also goes up. This is the conundrum of providing public services and promising to find cuts, is that there's a lot of valuable services that are provided, and it's difficult to cut them off once you start them. So what about top jobs? So I've given you kind of a sense of some trends, and I've kind of cherry-picked some results. I could go through 300 different industry groups with you, but nobody has any, except maybe me and the people that work for me. For some reason, we like going through this stuff. But I've given you kind of a sense as to what types of jobs may be in demand in the future. And I'm just wondering if anybody might offer a guess as to what might be, in terms of total growth, what occupation might be the fastest growing job in Alberta over the next, say, 3 to 5 years? Any ideas? Anybody? What? Medical field? Okay. Good guess. Good guess. Any other guesses? Software? Yeah. Sorry? Public health, yeah. Side gig, yeah. Agriculture. Nurses. So the healthcare, all of those are good guesses, by the way. But healthcare trumps everything. In the next 5 years, we've estimated there's going to be, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with knock codes, we put them in everywhere because we can keep track of things, but registered nurses and registered psychiatric nurses, knock 3012, And if you start to know what these are without looking at the number, then you know you're doing too much of it. But over 5,000 jobs. We've got a huge demand for healthcare professionals, and the nursing profession is going to be at the center of that. And you can see on this, or maybe you can see on it, we can break this down by different industry. Like some types of occupations are focused in one industry sector, and nursing is one of those occupations which is focused in the healthcare. So 98% of these jobs are going to be in the healthcare sector, but some other sectors also hire nursing professionals, but it's a small proportion of the total. So number 2, food counter attendants, kitchen helpers, and related support occupations, 3,700 jobs or more. So this is kind of surprising, right? Because we saw that chart that showed restaurant and bar activity actually had kind of leveled off. But we're projecting the provincial economy is going to continue to grow, and people will continue to, with the lifestyle, will continue to eat out. And unlike, well, I guess to some degree, it's kind of like this, but unlike the Amazon, although I guess you can skip the dishes and get your cheeseburger from McDonald's delivered to your house at some point, somebody still is preparing that food. So this sector is going to grow. One of the reasons why this shows up as being one of the top occupations in terms of number of jobs, it's a very large employer group. So even if it grows moderately, the number of people that this sector is going to require ends up being a large number. And you can see in the terms of industry breakdown that most of the almost 80% are going to be in accommodation and food services, but other sectors also are going to be demanding workers in this occupation, in particular the healthcare sector, not a surprise, and some other sectors. Nurses, aides, orderlies, and patient service, so people were guessing healthcare and nursing, healthcare professionals. This is number 2. Again, more than 3,600 jobs. Administrative officers. This kind of maybe is surprising. Almost 3,000 jobs. One of the reasons why this pops up, and what are administrative officers? So people working in offices, and this is one of those occupations where the nature of work is changing. An office administrator, might used to do filing and keep the stock room full and do a few things. Now, it's more like an executive assistant position. You've got to have more skills, more problem-solving skills, and be more adaptable to whatever the circumstances of what's going on in the office. And one of the reasons why you see this being a pretty big number is because look at all the sectors that have office administrative officers working for them. Almost every sector, to some significant degree, has these needs these kinds of workers. Same with general office support workers. We haven't gone to remote working entirely. Partly because maybe the technology isn't there. Partly because I think, in spite of everybody thinking, I can just work at home and I can Skype in. Skype doesn't always work so great, and you don't kind of get the same productive benefits of that kind of collaborative environment that you do by sitting around the table and discussing things and working the problems out. And I think people also like to go to work. Not everybody, but lots of people like to have an office. So the general office support, again, it covers a lot of different sectors, and so as the economy is going to grow, there's going to be an increase in demand for these workers. Similarly, support workers, janitorial, caretakers, and building superintendents. In our building, I'm in the Sun Life building downtown here, and if you just happen to kind of leave about 6 o'clock or so, the cleaning staff are getting ready to go up and do their work. It starts about 6:30 or 7 o'clock till whenever they're done. And there would be at least 30 people down in the bottom of the building. So whenever we build another tower, more office space goes up everywhere, and the same is true for a lot of commercial space. We need people to look after that space, and that's where these jobs come from. Lastly, in terms of the top, this is top 7. I think this is the last one. Yeah, we'll get back to this. Is I can keep going and going and going on this, but I thought this was interesting. Elementary school and kindergarten teachers. As the economy grows, we're going to have population increase driven mostly from migration, but also some natural increase. And as people migrate here to take jobs, albeit at maybe a slower pace than what it has been over the last decade, those kids, the children from those families that are moving here from elsewhere in Canada, from international places, have kids, and they are going to need to have teachers. So again, this is a fairly big population of workers, so just by its sheer size, and even modest amounts of economic growth, people that migrate here for work tend to have our younger families and tend to have children, and so this is going to be an area of growth as well. So there's a whole bunch more data, and you can get a lot more detail on this. If you want more interesting facts and information about sectors of growth and occupation growth, you can go to this website, and it's free. You can go and pull some data down. If you don't find something there and want to chat to us about it, you can give us a call and let us know. We can maybe help you out. So, occupation shortages, and I'm going to stop with this, and then if you've got some questions, we can take those. I've talked to you now about industry growth. I've talked to you about what occupations there's going to be a lot of occupational demand for workers in, but I haven't talked about shortages. So shortages is where you look at, so there's lots of growth in demand for workers. There's also supply is adjusting to that demand, so that how many of those jobs that are going to be in demand are going to be filled. We also have churn, where different sectors of the economy, people leave their job and they go do something else, and so there's the replacement workers for positions that are vacant that need to be filled. So that comes into the equation of looking at the supply and demand. So when we model the future labor market, we look at the demand for workers. That's what we've seen so far. And then when we want to see where the shortages are, what occupations and skills are going to be in demand, we need to look at where the supply is going to come from. And I'm not going to get into how we do that, but there's a lot of information that goes into doing that, of course. So what would be the occupation that probably is going to be most in demand, but also the most difficult to fill? Nursing, 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 nursing. We estimate there's going to be a shortage of over 2,000 nurses over the next 5 years. If you have had any experience with the healthcare system in the hospital, or know people that work in healthcare and work in hospitals, almost every shift somebody doesn't make it to work because there's a shortage of workers. They don't have a full complement of staff on that unit that day or that night. So part of this is just catch up. Part of this is that we haven't really fully staffed our institutional health care, but also there's a huge demand for nursing out in other elements of the healthcare system. So that's number one. Nurses' aides. Same problem. We have an accumulated shortage. We're suggesting that maybe upwards of 2,000 nursing aides, orderlies, patient services associates. We're going to be short. This is a shortage. We're going to have difficulty filling these jobs. Similarly, a shortage for social and community service workers. Again, this is an area where the demand for social services doesn't go down with an economic downturn. In fact, it goes up. And we have a lot of service providers that are having difficulty finding skilled workers to provide various kinds of services. There's quite a wide range of services. And so we're looking at upwards of maybe a shortage. So demand minus supply, a shortage of 1,000 people to fill these jobs. General office support workers, we saw a lot of demand, again, similar shortages. Receptionists, How many people have been to a building where there is no receptionist? You know, there's a buzzer, you know, and you got to phone somebody, and they're not at their desk because they're in the room waiting for you to come to the meeting, but you can't get to the meeting because you can't get into the area. But that's, again, a job which has changed in its nature. But still, a lot of businesses have receptionists, you know, like healthcare, for example. So if you were to take a breakdown, when you make a dentist appointment, you're working with somebody who isn't just answering the phone, but has other skills in terms of patient management and organization skills. So this is the group that we're talking about here. Early childhood educators and assistants, we're going to see shortages. Administrative officers, we're going to see shortages. Home child care providers, so this is part of that child care shortage that we talked about, where growth and demand for workers is going to come from. Financial auditors and accountants. Yeah, I know it's tax time. I had to put them in today because today, you know, your taxes are due today, right? So, my accountant is very busy and gets basically no sleep for 2 weeks. I always kind of wonder, like, how do you do that? But she does. Generally, this is another one of those occupational categories. There's financial auditors, but there's not a lot of auditing, but accounting work transcends sectors. There are accountants and financial analysts across a wide swath of different industry groups. So generally, as the economy grows, it's not like one sector that's going to be demanding all the accountants. It's not like the professional services group where accountants generally live. A lot of businesses have accountants on staff, and so as that sector of the economy grows, they need more people to do that. And finally, LPNs, another healthcare sector. If we were doing this, and maybe if you were here a few years ago before the economic downturn, and I showed you this list of occupational shortages, it was quite different than what we're seeing today. And I guess the lesson learned from that is that because things are changing, you kind of always have to keep on top of what those changes mean in terms of where the jobs are going to be, which makes career planning really a challenging occupation these days. Like, how do you tell people, you know, where if you want to do this, you've got some aptitude and interest in doing this. It's a 4-year education program to graduate. How do you know that occupation is even going to be a viable occupation 4 years from now? Things are changing that quickly. So that's one of the challenges, one of the importance of this kind of information. We're happy to provide it, and again, you can check in on the website. We provide a lot of this stuff for free. And if you've got questions about it, you can certainly give us a call. We'd be happy to try and answer those for you. Are there any questions here today people have? Yep. I'm going to be providing this slide deck to Paula, so it'll be available. We right now we're just we do labor market forecasting work, and we do it for clients, so we get paid to do that. But just because it's generally interesting, we put information up on this website. It's not our company website. It's a website that we just put different types of labor market related information up because there's a demand for it. So. This particular website right now, we're going to be putting up Alberta forecast data, but we've got forecast data for different geographies across Western Canada. So if you're interested in some of those, talk to us. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. So that was one of the questions. There's a question over here. Yes, sir. There's a lot of controversy in Ontario with some practices that the provincial government there are putting in place, where they're talking about losing thousands of teacher jobs. So this is a dynamic issue. Politics changes, governments come in, governments go. At the end of the day, kind of how we look at it, you can try and kind of guess, what political party might win and what the policies of that particular government might be. At the end of the day, kind of the way we look at it is that people have some expectation about certain things. And where it's a market-related good, the marketplace kind of determines, what's provided and what the costs and things are. Where it's a public good, like education, and people will argue about private versus public education, and that doesn't really matter in terms of the jobs, because people have an expectation about what education they want to consume. And there's probably, for young parents with kids, there's nothing more important to most of them than what school are my kids going to go to. They pick where they live in large part because, here's a school. One of my employees is moving because she's got a daughter and they want to go to this school. So they're moving because of that. So while you have, political influences in terms of policy around education and class sizes and a bunch of other things that affect teachers and other classroom resources, the public expectations about that probably tend to even some of those swings more or less to something in the middle of what those swings are. So yeah, maybe in a year or two we might be swinging in a certain direction because of public policy changes. My guess would be is that over time those swings up or down will tend to even out because people's expectations about that service will drive what that public policy is in the longer run. But yeah, maybe in the short term, certainly in Ontario, there's a lot of angst about public education and the number of teachers that will be employed there. And you can't predict what the magnitude of those things are. But in the longer term, if the population grows and the number of students increases, there's going to need to be more education professionals. Other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, and I just want to underscore why you're seeing these being so-called the top jobs. They're top only in the sense that there's more demand in terms of the number because it's a large base, and it's accessible work for lots of people because it is relatively low skill. So there are lots of growth in other jobs, and if you wanted to look at different kinds of occupations from a percentage, if you took this not from an absolute number of jobs and did it by percentage of jobs, you'd see quite a different mix of jobs. Some of these would be lower percentage growth jobs, whereas other sectors and other occupations would be higher percentage. But you're kind of now, your question, as I understand, is more kind of about from a career decision point of view. If you you want to be something over here in the long run, but in the meantime, what should I do? My choice of relatively low skill entry kind of position. Where am I going to get the most value in terms of experience? What am I going to get the most value in terms of experience from? And I think it really depends. It depends a lot on the individual. I think I'm not a career planner, but as a parent, you kind of try and plan your kid's career. Don't do it. It's a waste of time. It does no good at all. But I'll just give you an example. I have two daughters. One daughter was very clearly from the beginning, wherever this came, well, first she wanted to be, she's not here, right? Okay, I can say this. She wanted to be a figure skating comedian. Try and find that in your Knox. She ended up pursuing law, and from a very early age, that's what she wanted to be. She wanted to be a lawyer. And, everybody said, oh, that's really good. So what's your other daughter going to do? Well, we don't know. We don't know. She doesn't know. What about this? No, we don't know. She doesn't know. Stop asking. We don't know. And so I was less worried about her than I was my older daughter, because I thought, well, what if you get into law and then you find out you hate it? You have no... So it kind of depends on the person. So what she did for work, she did some volunteer work for some different organizations that kind of had a legal bent to it. She found that she really liked it, and I thought, okay, this is good. I still worried about it because I thought there's no plan B. My younger daughter that didn't know what she was going to do ended up, in junior high school, she had a career experience, I can't remember what it was called, part of the COM program, where one day a week, one evening a week, she went and she could do this work. It wasn't, I don't remember if she got paid or not. It was kind of just work experience. She worked at Subway, and I got to eat a lot of subs, and well, they were not free, but I ate a lot of subs. And she ended up doing a lot of work in the serving industry. She got a job at Earl's, and then she worked at other, so she kind of worked her way up in the food service industry. And one of the things that I think has put her in good stead is that there's a sector which kind of worked to her strengths. She's very much a people person. She likes people. Long ago she had like 1,000 friends on Facebook. I thought, how do you do that? But she learned how to read people in the service industry. She came home one night, and we were just sitting in. I had a crappy. How was work? I had a crappy day at work. I said, what happened? I misread this table. Like, what do you mean? He says, well, sometimes people want the perky, engaged server, like I'm all about you and making witty conversation, and other people, they just want to be alone, they want to talk, they just want you to be there when they need you. And so to maximize tips, she kind of reads the table and figures out what they want, and then she tries to give it to them. And I thought, wow, this is way more complicated than I ever thought it was. But she's now going into dental hygiene, and this is very much a people business. And, her skills that she gained serving, I thought no matter what she does, these are going to be valuable skills because she's learned how to read people. And it also fit to her strength. It wasn't kind of draining for her. She found it interesting and energizing. So I don't know if there's a good answer to that. It kind of depends on the individual and what their strengths are. This is what you guys do all the time, is figuring that out and matching them up to the right path. But there are certain things, if you can, employers will look for, and me being one of them, is if you've got some kind of history of doing something kind of related to the work. Because when I interview people, I want to find out, tell me something about something you know about. And I want them to explain it and talk to me about it. So this is something that I find as an employer really interesting. I think, it just depends on the individual and what they ultimately want to be. That's my lay opinion about it. But there are also a lot of things we do. We look at career paths, because in our modeling, when people leave a job, why do they leave a job? There's voluntary separation reasons and involuntary separation reasons, and one of those is career pathing. So we look at what kinds of skills are transferable going from one occupation to another. And at these kind of entry-level positions, unless you want to be a manager in that industry, it doesn't necessarily lead very far. But if you want to be a manager of something else, if you're a manager in this industry, that is transferable. This is a real challenge in forecasting because it's hard for us to make all of those predictions. Yes, both. Yep. So first, then second. Go ahead. Good question. Again, from survey work that we've done with employers, one of the things we ask them about are recruitment and retention techniques, and what kinds of things are working and not working for you. And somebody mentioned the gig economy here a little bit earlier. And some employers which require some flexibility in terms of the number of workers, because their business is like an accordion. It grows and then it contracts, and taking on full-time workers and full-time employees, maybe part-time work, but a permanent employee, is a big commitment, and they don't want to lay people. So some, depending on the sector, some employers are very nervous about bringing on permanent workers. So they kind of play this gig economy game with workers, which is, I think, it creates a lot of stress for workers, and it isn't a long-term strategy that probably will work in a lot of industries, but it seems to be happening a lot more because of all the uncertainty in the economy. Employers aren't sure about where things are going, so they want to make this significant commitment to workers. Again, I would point you to some of the Calgary reports that we've done, because it talks about some of those things in terms of employer retention, recruitment and retention strategies. I just have one more question, and I think I'm going to be done. Nope, go ahead. Okay, well, maybe. I'm sorry? Well, 3 years ago, you'd have seen lots of trades here. Yeah, it's there's a lot of tradespeople who are underemployed, and so we're finding that as the economy grows, and especially tradespeople that were working in the energy sector or related activities to the energy sector have found themselves with a lot less work than they had previously. They will gradually be absorbed as the economy grows, and the demands for those services will increase. But in the meantime, young graduates coming out of NAIT and SAIT in particular, and some trades are really suffering, and it'll be interesting to see. I think those institutions in particular, I would say, do a really good job of having their pulse on the industry. But these are things that nobody can predict, and especially when you're in a 3 or 4 or 5 year program, you can't see what's going to happen 3 or 4 or 5 years from now. But I think one of the things that the people coming out, graduating from those programs have going for them is those institutions work really hard with industry to try and get employment and get them employed. But it's going to be tough unless the construction sector picks up, and it's looking kind of dismal at the moment. I think there's maybe another question here. Yes, please. The work that we've done on that is proprietary. We use that in our modeling work, but there is information about it. I would point you to, I think it's Windsor, Essex. It's kind of Workforce WE website. Really interesting information that they provide. That documents how different occupations transition into different occupations. And I would also point you to some work that was recently, I think, announced and made available publicly that Calgary Economic Development has done around some of the oil patch occupations. That's really valuable stuff. Unfortunately, it's only a few occupations because that's but a lot of people are in those occupations are affected by the downturn. So it's really, those are examples of very valuable publicly available sources of that information. And really at this time, if you can get your hands on that and have an understanding of that, that's one of the most valuable things you could do. We did some work with some people with TransAlta because of the phasing out of coal and coal-fired energy production. And so we're, at the TransAlta plant west of Edmonton, there's over 1,000 workers possibly affected by that phase out. And so we prepared for them, looking at all the occupation. And I asked the HR person, I said, well, what occupations should we look at in terms of transitioning? I was kind of expecting maybe half a dozen, but it was 30. So there was a lot. And some of them were into same kind of areas, but it's really occupation specific. So, again, if you've got something that you're interested in, call me. I'm happy to talk about it. While it's proprietary, I'm happy to share information, as you might be asking questions about it. So. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And Darren is here if you've got questions that you weren't able to get answered. He can stick around for a few minutes. So thank you very much. I learned that I have to give up my florist job and get into the cannabis industry. So thank you very much. That was great information.